Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Hollow and it's finally time to talk about the true endgame Necromancer. I'm now level 74 and at this point I've got my ideal setup. The main unique, the right weapon, it's all hitting really hard. Our Bone Spear is able to hit ticks of 600k and higher casually, constantly. The incredible thing about that is it's hitting multiple times per Bone Spear, so what's actually happening is we're hitting millions per multiple uses, up to the tens of millions extremely quickly, so the DPS is insane. And we're doing it from range, which is no small thing. At this point, I just need to re-roll my equipment to reach, say, peak ideal skills for very slight damage increases, but then there's a long-term aspect to consider before that, which is in tiers 40 plus and beyond in Nightmare dungeons, we have to focus more on survivability, you know, changing our aspects and our armor, the skill priorities to simply stay alive, but below tier 40, we can easily push our damage with some considerations for survivability. Overall, this is simply extreme damage, very easy to play, leaning into somewhat of a glass cannon concept. Partly because we have dropped the iframe Blood Mist to get a consistent mitigation in the form of Bone Storm Shield combined with Bone Storm itself, which provides a massive damage increase. However, we can get Blood Mist back into the build should we need it, which may happen at the extremely high Nightmare tiers. As a reminder though, this is an endgame version of the build. We have a leveling version on the channel if that's what you're after, but this will involve long-term gear plans and lots of Paragon points. Ultimately, it destroys. I'm very pleased with it, so let's explain how it works and how you can achieve this. We begin, as always, with the skill tree, picking up our basic of Bone Splinters as our essence generator, and enhancing that just to get us to the next stage. Of course, our main damage ability is Bone Spear, so 5 out of 5 on that. We enhance it, and then we're going Paranormal Bone Spear over Supernatural Bone Spear. That's because our main aspect, the splintering aspect, causes vulnerability anyway with the Bone Spears, and we have other ways to generate vulnerability, such as the Bone Prison, so this increase on critical strike chance is very useful, and this is a pretty big damage spike compared to picking up another vulnerability. Of course, as always, 3 out of 3 Hued Flesh, spawn as many corpses as possible, doubled against bosses, 3 out of 3 Unliving Energy, so we've got the maximum essence we can get, and improving the damage at the cost of more essence with them perfectly balanced. Into the next tree, we're 5 out of 5 on Corpse Explosion, we're enhancing it, and we're going, of course, to Plague Corpse Explosion, and of course, we also pick up Bone Prison. Not only do you create a wall to trap elites and enemies in, which is very useful, we enhance it to mean that it's a great essence generator. If you pull a bunch of enemies in, then prison them, you get a spike of essence. We go for Ghastly Bone Prison though, to make them all vulnerable, guaranteed to make the DPS hit hard from the moment you get going. We also pick up these two passives, 3 out of 3 Grim Harvest to improve our essence generation when consuming corpses, and also the big damage increase for 6 seconds after you pop a corpse as well. On the next tier, we completely bypass it to go down to pick up Corpse Tendril at 1 rank. We will enhance it for added CC, and then go for Blighted Corpse Tendrils to spawn Blood Orbs. These give us healing, and there is potential synergy there. This is where the build suffers slightly. We're at 2 out of 3 of the Necrotic Carapace. We'd love to be 3 out of 3 on this, but it's at the point where we want everything that we have, and so there's got to be a level taken from somewhere. Either way, whenever we fortify, we have a 10% reduced damage reduction, and that's still there even at 1 point. Next, we have Serration for the massive increase of damage per 10 essence we have when casting on Bone Skills, then Compound Fracture, again making Bone Skills much more damaging, and Evulsion for the much more critical strike damage on vulnerable enemies with Bone Skills further. Here's the next tree, and towards the end here, we're still picking up 3 out of 3 standalone for the damage reduction when having no minions, and increasing the value of sacrifice benefits we get. We're also picking up Bone Storm and its further enhancements all the way to Supreme. This is giving us 20% increased crit strike chance when active, so we're spiking up towards 100% whenever we have this on. It also works as damage over time to those standing near us. It reduces the damage we take while it's on, so it works as an active mitigation. And again, we have an aspect that gives us a shield when we use this. It is a phenomenal ability that I really can't live without, and I was willing to give up Blood Mist for it. Finally, as always, we're going with Ossified Essence, which is massively increasing our damage the more essence we have above 50. So increasing the cap of essence and always using Bone Spear when you're above 50 or higher, this is a massive damage increase. And that synergizes, as we'll talk about, with another aspect we have on our gear. But first, we have our Book of the Dead and our sacrifice choices. We're going for the Skeletal Warriors for the non-physical resistance boost, giving us some, permanent mitigation we desperately need. For Skeletal Mages, we go for Shadow to increase the maximum essence amount. This is great because obviously the higher essence we have, the more damage we do. Though there is the cold option for the increased damage on vulnerable enemies, also very good. Lastly, obviously with the Golem, it's still Iron Golem for the massive crit strike damage increase. Next up then we have our Paragon boards, which right now I'm working on my 3rd board. Ideally I will ultimately have 4. For our first board though, we work our way up and to the right, picking up the rare node on the way, and then to the glyph socket. This glyph socket is of course, territorial, giving you a flat 10% damage reduction against all close enemies. This is really good mitigation that Necromancer really needs, a permanent mitigation like that. Also, it can be a pretty major increase to the damage to close enemies, as you can see, as you upgrade this glyph more and more. You'll need 25 dexterity within the radius, and as you can see, I've achieved that here. When I extend the radius at level 15, we're at level 13 right now, I will also be picking up further nodes, anything to increase the damage, and these magic nodes in general. Either way, we make our way up to the left and up to the next board, which of course is the Bone Graft board. This is for the legendary node and all of the incredible benefits of the magic nodes and the rare nodes you can find on this board for a bone spear build. Bone Graft increases the damage you deal with your bone skills and your maximum essence, which is a double up amazing combination. So while you attack, you deal more damage, you get more essence, the cap increases. Maintaining combat is amazing through this perk. We work our way to the right and up to that, also picking up the rare node Entomb right above it, picking up a couple of the magic nodes, and then working our way up and around to the left here, then down and to the left to the rare node Reinvigorate. This gives us maximum essence and essence on kill, helping us keep that resource going. I also pick up all of the magic nodes around it for increased maximum essence and essence on kill, again helping with the resource. Then we work our way up to the rare node Calcified, increasing our crit strike with the bone skills, and picking up all the magic nodes around it to increase bone skill damage and crit strike, which is amazing. Then we come up to the left and go towards the glyph, working our way up and around, getting the socket, and then we put Exploit in there. This is specifically done first because we only need 25 dexterity to get that second effect going. Dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases your damage by 1% times for 6 seconds, up to 10% as it stacks and stacks. So a very powerful stacking damage to do with vulnerability, which we're using. It only takes 25 dexterity, which you can easily activate without enhancing this glyph to increase its radius. At this point though, we want to consider more powerful glyphs, such as Sacrificial. You deal 10% times increased damage when you have no active minions, so that's a 10% times, so the multiplier, which is vital permanently for all damage, not just vulnerable damage in the case of Exploit. So Sacrificial is better, but it requires, as you can see, 40 intelligence in the radius range, which you cannot reach without upgrading, increasing the radius size, and then picking up all the intelligence nodes after that. So while you're working on your endgame build, you should start with the vulnerable perk of Exploit and upgrade Sacrificial as soon as you can. Once that's at 15, it can increase the radius range, and then you can pick up all the intelligence needed, the 40 intelligence needed to activate the second perk. At which point, we'll move the Exploit glyph to the next board where we'll socket here, still benefiting from the vulnerable damage when we do that, even without upgrading it. Either way, make sure to pick up the 25 dexterity within the original radius like I've done here, and we're also picking up the rare nodes. Then we work our way down and to the left to activate the next board, which as you can see is the Flesh Eater board. This legendary node, we just consume 5 corpses, which we do constantly anyway for essence, and it will give us 40% times, so a multiplier, increased damage for 6 seconds. This is absolutely huge. So I work my way around to that, picking up the Stifle rare node on the way. At this point, at level 74, I'm out of points, and I even have multiple renowns complete as well. Once I have more points though, I will work my way around to the left here, picking up Targeted on the way, activating the socket, putting Exploit in that, and putting Sacrificial in this slot after upgrading it to level 15, getting the dex requirement to get the secondary effect, and then eventually working my way to the 4th board. However, I will be spending a lot of points after I upgrade this glyph, and this glyph, and this glyph to get more nodes around it, and that will cost a lot more Paragon points. At this point, the true end game though is reaching a level 100 to have enough points to even make it to a 4th board and get benefits from that. Now it's time for us to talk about equipment, because this is obviously a really big important of the endgame. This features a really important unique you're absolutely going to want, and really importantly, you want to be using a two-handed sword. This is because the main perk you can't change depends on the weapon type, and as you can see, the two-handed sword weapon type's perk is critical strike damage, which of course we want. Let's compare that to a really good two-handed scythe. Their main perk is life on kill. That's not necessarily bad, it just would be better if it was mitigation, like reduced damage or giving us some sort of shield. So between the two-handed scythes and the swords, you absolutely want the swords. We'll work our way from the top though with our unique, the main one for the build, Deathless Visage, which is basically one that really enhances your bone spear. It causes the bone spear to leave behind echoes as it travels, exploding like a bombing run. If I take the helmet off and shoot a bone spear normally, it's just a bone spear. But when I put on the unique and shoot it off, you see how it has this trailing triple explosion as it goes, these blue bombs. That is majorly increasing the damage that we're able to deal with every single bone spear. Something that enhances our main damaging ability can't really be ignored. For our chest piece, this is how we're making Bone Storm actually give us a barrier. So each time it deals damage, it gives us a barrier based on percent health. I've high rolled here, so it's giving me 5% of my base life for 10 seconds. So as I activate the barrier and walk in, you can see at the bottom left where my red health bar is, it's now covered in blue because I've got a shield. They're going to have to work through that shield before they can even damage me. This is actual mitigation for a Necromancer. Wonderful. I wish we had this built into our kit normally. As you can see, it doesn't last forever though, only 10 seconds, and Bone Storm is a long cooldown. For our gloves, we have the all-important Grasping Veins aspect, our Corpse Tendrils, the pull in. It gives us increased crit strike chance, which is vital, and then increased crit strike damage, which is very nice. The crit strike chance though is what this is all about, as another way to push us to 100% crit chance. Next is the legs. We have a defensive one here, the Disobedience aspect. We gain 0.5% times increased armor for 4 seconds whenever we deal damage, stacking up to 50%. So it's increasing our raw armor stat, which is reducing the damage we take as a form of permanent mitigation. This is a really powerful aspect and another great one for someone who has no mitigation. For boots, it's a lot less interesting. There's a couple interesting boot uniques, but as a baseline, I go with the Wind Striker aspect. Basically, whenever we crit, we get movement speed for 6 seconds, which is basically always. For the weapon then, as I've expressed, you should be using a two-handed sword for the crit strike damage. This is where our main aspect for the build comes in, the Splintering aspect, causing Bone Spear's primary attack to make enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable for up to 5 seconds. Then the Bone Shards deal a massive increased percent of bonus damage to vulnerable enemies and pierce them. This is the crux of the main damage of your build, greatly enhancing your main ability. For the amulet, we go for the Ossified Essence or Serration aspect. This improves our key passive we talked about earlier, and this is actually a multiplier. It says 1% plus, but it actually works as a multiplier. So by having this, you can pretty much double your damage, and so we put it on our amulet because it's the next best thing over a weapon. You absolutely must have this aspect in this build, basically. Last up are the 2 rings though, which work as our resource generators. As you can see, I've got a high rolled loop of Torment, meaning whenever we crit with our bone skills, which is always, we have a 30% increase to our essence regen for 4 seconds. That's wonderful. Then we have Ring of Exposed Flesh, which is even better. A lucky hit effect where we have a 10% chance to generate essence when hitting vulnerable targets, which is pretty much always as well. I got a low roll, which sucks, but hey, it's still incredibly good and in fact better than the other one that was a high roll. I'd like to highlight the aspect of Umbral, which restores 1 to 4 primary resource when you control an enemy. So every time we CC, which is quite a lot, we'll get 1 to 4 of our main resource. At this late stage, just 1 is not high enough, so I don't use this imprint from the codex. But if you get, say, 3 or 4 as an actual aspect you can imprint or use, then absolutely use that and use it over the loop of Torment, in my opinion. But that's the gear and aspects, but let's just quickly highlight the 2 other aspects of this, the gems. As you can see, in armor, I'm going for rubies for an increase of our maximum life. For our weapon, we're going for emeralds to get critical strike damage on vulnerable enemies up. And for the jewelry, we go for the skulls for the raw armor. When it comes to the skills you're looking for on your equipment, there's defensive options and offensive options. For offensive increases, you're going to want bone spear levels as priority, then crit strike chance as priority. Then after that, things like crit strike damage, damage with bone skills, resource generation of any kind, core skill damage, max essence, or vulnerable damage increases. Whereas when it comes to defensive options, you want anything of damage reduction. So raw damage reduction, like total armor or raw damage in general, max health, close enemy damage reduction, all stats up, healing received, these are all good examples. You'll want a healthy mix, but in the endgame, a bigger priority on defensive skills on your armor. Finally, let's do a quick showcase of how you're meant to play this build. To open a fight for maximum burst, you would activate Bone Storm, increasing your crit strike chance. Imprison the target in Bone Prism, causing them to be vulnerable. Deal damage with, say, a Bone Spear, generating a corpse for you to Corpse Tendril to increase your crit strike even further. Spam Bone Spears while popping Corpse Explosion for the damage increase, ideally with 5 popped, so we're stacking up that legendary node perk, and then at 5 stacks, we get that increase, massively increasing our damage by 40% times. So again, we pop Bone Storm, we Imprison, we Bone Spear, we CC, we pop a corpse, and then we throw Bone Spears, blasting damage. As you can see in the couple of single target examples I show, this pretty much kills everything before you even get going. We are talking tens of millions of damage in, say, just a few Bone Spear casts, and that damage just increases the more corpses you pop and maintain your buffs. It's like an initial wind-up period and then you really get going. But there you have it, that is the endgame Bone Spear build where I'm working it currently. It's hitting extremely hard and it has enough survivability to work great in tiers 40 and below. Naturally, I am missing that iframe of Blood Mist, and I want to highlight how you would maybe get that, spending a single point to pick it up. Since we're doing most of our damage with the Bone Spear itself, could be possible to say drop one level of Corpse Explosion, because as you go into the higher tiers and where, you know, Blood Mist may be more relevant as a avoid damage tool, you're not going to need as much damage because you're already going to be hitting so hard anyway, and this isn't reducing your main damage, this is just to get buffs. To fit that into this build, I would drop Bone Splinters, yes, our basic auto attack, which feels terrible because it's our backup, reliable, if everything fails, way to generate essence. But to be honest, that should never happen. It's a big mistake if it does, and you always have Bone Prison and maybe Popping Bodies as a backup, and that would give us a slot to actually fit it into the build. What's next for Necromancer though? How do we push this even further in like the mega late game? There is actually a lot of talk about Bone Spirit and how while it consumes even more essence than Bone Spear, it can hit harder. However, it's outrageously dependent on certain stats and equipment as well as mega essence generation, but I will be looking into it. If this video has helped you though, be sure to drop a like, and if you have any advice for fellow Necromancers, you can drop it in the comments. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.